We're sitting here in Charlotte, North Carolina, to have a radio debate with Dr. Eugenie Scott from California. We're going to start in just a few moments. Supposed to go who knows how long. I'm speaking Denver Baptist Church tonight and tomorrow night. We thought we'd just videotape this radio debate and see how this turns out so folks can get a feel of what it's like to have to debate with these folks who believe in evolution. We're at WBT, 11:10 a.m. and it is now 3:10 in the afternoon on the 8th, and we're ready to start.
Oh boy, it was a busy weekend for me. I don't know about you, but spent part of it with Catherine Witt. We'll talk about that later, though. More about that later. We've been talking about this for a couple of days, too, getting everybody ready for this. A couple of months ago, Dr. Kent Hovind joined us on the air when he was in town to speak at the Concord Bible Church, and he is back tonight and tomorrow night to speak at the, it'll come to me, help me out here, at the Denver Baptist Church up on Lake Norman, about 30 miles north of Charlotte on Highway 16, tonight and tomorrow from 7 till 9. Dr. Hovind is a creationist. He became a Christian at the age of 16, and although you have a scientific background, that you were, I believe, a science teacher, is that correct?
Yes, sir, high school science teacher.
You came to disbelieve what the theories of science were teaching.
Well,
why don't you tell me what...
I came to disbelieve evolution. Evolution has nothing to do with science. I still love science. I'm in favor of science, but it's just evolution that's stirred in with science that I disbelieve.
And have since done a lot of your own research in this and have come up with presentations that you take around the country to show the veracity of creationism versus the theory of evolution.
Correct? Yes, sir, that's correct.
The last time that you were here, you volunteered to come back, and you've also volunteered to debate with an evolutionist. And so we have contacted one, and she's joining us today from California. Dr. Eugenie Scott has been since 1987 the executive director of the National Center for Science Education Incorporated. It's a pro-evolution, non-profit science education organization with members in every state. Dr. Eugenie Scott holds a PhD in physical anthropology from the University of Missouri. She is taught at the University of Kentucky, the University of Colorado, and in the California State University system. She's a human biologist. Her research has been in medical anthropology and skeletal biology, and she has worked nationwide to communicate the scientific method to the general public and to improve how science as a way of knowing is taught in school. She has appeared on Our Magazine, Geraldo, Crossfire, Issues on Trial, the Morning Edition on NPR, the Pat Buchanan Show, and All Things Considered, etc., etc., and she joins us this afternoon. I thank you. I'm not exactly sure how we'll begin, but I guess we'll begin with the basic argument. And the basic argument is that scientists, or some scientists, believe that the world was not created precisely the way it's spelled out in the book of Genesis, but creationists believe literally in the book of Genesis. Is that pretty much the argument we have here?
Well,
today?
There are probably quite a few creationists who would still not believe the literal Genesis account. They would maybe say God did it, but not according to the book of Genesis. So there's a variety of creationists. I am a Bible-believing young earth creationist. I believe the Bible is literally true, scientifically accurate, and that the world is less than 10,000 years old.
And Doctor, what do the evolutionists say? Dr. Scott.
Get that speaker on. You can't hear her? Put that by the microphone.
I have to bring it up. I just got back a few weeks ago from a 3-day retreat with a bunch of United Church of Christ ministers, and I assure you every single one of those ladies and gentlemen were creationists, but every single one of those ladies also accepted evolution as the way God chose to bring about the world. I would say that the distinction, and perhaps Kent, you might agree with me on this, the distinction between creation and evolution is not whether God created, because certainly God could have created any way he wanted to, including through evolution, if that's the way he chose. The distinction really is a question of history. What happened in the history of the universe? Did everything appear suddenly, all at one time, as the literal reading of the Bible of Genesis would suggest, or does the universe have a history? Did change take place since the beginning, whenever that beginning occurred? I think it is clear that the vast majority of the scientific community agree that change has taken place since the beginning, that what we see today in the world is not the same as what has been in the past.
Well, I would have to say that we need to define our terms here. Evolution the word simply means unrolling or outrolling or rolling out. So, there's a lot of varieties of it, but change through time. And I agree, there's been changes through time, but there is cosmic evolution, which is the bigger scheme of things, the Big Bang Theory, the universe starting from nothing.
Right.
And then there is biological evolution, which is changes once life gets here. Then there are changes. And what I object to, I guess, is the general theory of evolution, that the entire universe made itself out of nothing for no apparent reason, and that no creator is necessary. I would say a real strict definition would make evolution atheistic.
Well,
You don't
Ken,
need that.
I don't see how you can say that, because evolution is a science, and a science cannot be atheistic or pro-religious. A science has to be neutral toward religion.
And what I hear you, I don't mean to interrupt, but Dr. Scott, what I heard you saying in your opening comments was the fact that, at least what I gathered, was the two are not necessarily mutually exclusive, that...
But the thing about science is a particular way of knowing. Revelation is another way of knowing. There's a variety of ways of knowing. Science is a particular way of knowing that is restricted. In science, we're trying to understand a restricted phenomenon, which is the natural world. And we have restrictions on how we go about understanding that phenomenon.
Well, now, let me ask you this, because it's called the theory of evolution.
Correct.
So if it is, in fact, a fact, why is it referred to as the theory of evolution?
It's both. What do you think, when you hear the word gravity, what do you think of?
Newton. I guess the theory of gravity, right?
Correct. Gravity is a theory. Evolution is a theory. Theory in science is a term of art. It means a special thing within science that it doesn't mean on the street, so to speak. If you talk about, well, I have a theory that the Giants are going to win the World Series this year, that's sort of a casual use of the term theory that's not the same as the way a scientist uses it. The word theory in science means explanation. And gravity is an explanation for why things fall to the earth when you drop them. Evolution is an explanation for a wide variety of information, things from the fossil record, from biogeography, from biochemistry, from geology, from lots and lots of different areas. And to say that evolution is a theory merely means that it is a well-founded explanation, the best explanation we've got so far, and the one that is accepted thus far.
Now, both of you have scientific backgrounds, so it would seem to me that science is open to question and open to revelation. So therefore, if 10 years from now you discovered something in your scientific research, either of you, that would dispute the theory of revolution, or evolution rather, or would dispute your theory of creationism, would either of you be open to change?
Absolutely.
Yes, I would.
That's an excellent question, and I would actually like to ask Kent what kind of data would refute young Earth special creation. I've never been able, when I've asked this of other young Earth special creationists, I've never been able to get an answer that is actually testable. Can you give me an example of what kind of data would cause you to rethink whether the world is created all at one time and all of the plants and animals in their present form?
Yes, you mentioned a key word there, testable. I think you made a statement a few minutes ago that evolution is a science. I would object to that vehemently. Evolution is a philosophy. It's actually a religion.
Let's talk about the science first.
Okay, well, yeah, that's what I want to distinguish between. See, evolution is not science. It's a religion that people choose to believe in.
But Kent, what kind of data would cause you to give up your conclusion that the literal view of the Bible, that all the plants and animals were created in their present form a short period of time ago, within thousands of years?
Right.
What kind of data would cause you to give that idea up?
Yeah, I will get to that in a second, but we got a couple things hanging that I think are very preliminary to this. The definition of science is not a way of knowing. You'll notice in the last 20 years there's been a real tendency in the textbooks to change the definition of science to what she said earlier. Science is a way of knowing. If you look it up in a dictionary, science is the accumulated body of knowledge that we have. It's things that we know. The scientific method involves things that are observable, testable, and demonstratable. Evolution is none of those. Nobody observes it happening. We don't observe any major changes. We don't see a horse, coming from a butterfly. We don't see.
Not.
We don't see.
Certainly, evolutionists would never predict that.
Sure. Well, they predict it did happen over a long period of time.
Hardly. I don't think anybody's predicted that horses came from butterflies. I think somebody's misled you about what evolution is, if that's the case.
Do you believe? Wait a minute. Wait. Do you believe?
Wait. Whoa. What?
Introduced us to.
Okay. Do you believe fish gradually changed to amphibians? Amphibians changed to reptiles. Reptiles changed to mammals.
Actually, that's not the way it happened, but we keep getting distracted here, Mr. Collins. The question I asked, which we sort of haven't been able to get to, is what kind of data would Kent accept that would demonstrate to him
Okay.
that all plants and animals did not occur suddenly all at one time within the last couple thousand years.
All right, let me jump in here. I'd like Dr. Hovind, if you would answer that question. I will come back and we'll
Sure.
all have her answer how evolution happened. If it didn't happen the way you just described, with fish becoming amphibians, amphibians becoming reptiles, reptiles becoming mammals, we'll find out how it did happen.
Yeah, which
Answer
is
her
ultimately what
question.
they believe, that and
Well,
life coming from non-life. But
answer her
okay,
question.
in order for something to be scientific, it has to be observable, testable, demonstratable. There is no way this argument's going to be resolved scientifically. You can't offer data that proves the Earth is billions of years old because you were not there, I was not there, nobody you know was there. It is outside the realm of science. This idea of proving the Earth is young or old is simply impossible scientifically. It's not testable, it's not demonstratable. The problem is there are two different ways to look at things, and some people, they interpret the facts in light of their philosophy. The evolutionists have already decided the Earth is billions of years old, and so when they look at the fossil record, they see those different layers of rocks as being different ages. The creationist looks at the different layers of rocks, the same data, we're both staring at the same geologic formations, and the creationist comes to the conclusion that all of these rock layers were deposited very rapidly in a catastrophe, the worldwide flood. So we both have the same data, but we're coming to opposite conclusions based on our prejudices, our preconceived ideas.
So what you're saying then is there are no data that would cause you to reject your point of view because your scientific creationism really isn't scientific.
Well, neither is evolution. You mentioned in the letter that you
We're
faxed
talking
in.
about evolution here. We're talking about you. We'll get back to evolution in a second.
No, I
What
agree.
you're saying is that scientific creationism is not scientific.
I agree. There's no possible way to prove it scientifically.
Why do you guys keep trying to get it taught in the public school science classes? If it's not science, it shouldn't be taught.
Well, see, that's to prove the point. Evolution isn't science either, and it shouldn't be
Now
taught.
let's talk about whether evolution is scientific. First of all, you have an exceedingly narrow definition of what science is. If we had to refer to things scientific as only those which were directly testable, directly observable, we'd have a pretty short list of sciences that we could talk about. For example, particle physics. Nobody has seen an atom. Nobody can observe the particles that are smashing into each other in an atom smasher.
Oh, I agree. Sure.
So therefore, particle physics is not science.
No, there is a lot of theory in particle physics. An awful lot of theory.
But hey, but it's not science because you can't directly observe it.
Well, my point in this is that, and it's very difficult to get an evolutionist to admit this, what they have is exactly the same as what a creationist has. They have a strong belief in something that is not observable, testable, or demonstratable. Both are fundamentally religions. And
Now you're saying that unless it's directly observable, it's not scientific. So, but I think that you'll probably agree that particle physics is a science. So there must be some kinds of sciences in which direct observation is not completely relevant.
Okay, yes, and I would say creation would fall into that category. Creation is a scientific theory that is not directly testable. I mean, we weren't here when God created the world.
Well,
But
I don't know. I can think of some ways to test young Earth creationism.
Okay, let's hear one.
Well, you should be doing this job because one of the things that a real scientist does is come up with ways that his theory or explanation could possibly be refuted.
Okay, I've got a good one for you if you can't think of one. But
you know, if you have if the entire geological column was laid down by the flood, which is your position, how do you explain 80 different layers of coal in the Midwest? Were there 80 different floods?
oh no, that could all be done in one flood. Mount St. Helens is doing a good job of proving that for us right now as we speak.
No, Mount St. Helens shows that catastrophes of various sorts and large quantities of water can produce very impressive geological features. It
Exactly
does not,
right.
by any stretch of the imagination, demonstrate that the whole Grand Canyon could be laid down by water.
Well, no, wait. Now, you would have to agree, I'm sure, if you've studied your geology, that all of the layers of strata in the geologic column in the Grand Canyon are sedimentary rock, which means they were indeed laid down by water.
Nope, some of them were laid down by
Okay,
air.
volcanic,
Some of them
yeah,
are
windblown.
are aeolian deposits, which is pretty tough for you guys to handle when it...
No. You mean talk about windblown ash and stuff? Sure, that happens. I think in the flood there was a catastrophe, disaster, volcanoes going off, there was ash layers. The trees...
It's pretty crazy because you got the flood going over, depositing a water layer, and then you have the flood waters going someplace, an ash layer being deposited, then the flood water coming back and depositing water layer. You know, this whole thing is just really silly.
Okay, I got to take a break right now, and we'll come back and we'll continue this conversation. And I want to find out, since you refuted, well, I want to find out how you feel evolution actually did take place. And let me get a response from you, Dr. Scott, about what data we have that proves the Earth is older than, how old do you say it is, Dr. Hovind? 6,000 years?
6,000 or 7,000 years.
Okay. Our guests are Dr. Kent Hovind here in the studio and Dr. Genie Scott on the phone with us from California, and we'll continue our conversation in just a second.
Going somewhere over the holidays? Rent a book on tape from Audio Library. Entertain the kids in the car or catch up with the hottest new novels and bestsellers on tape with over 5,000 titles to choose from at Audio Library, Cotswold Mall, and McMullen Creek.
I want to tell you about a place called with a PhD in physical anthropology, and here in the studio with us, she's joining us by telephone, by the way, here in the studio, Dr. Kent Hovind, who is in town to speak about creation science at the Denver Baptist Church tonight and tomorrow night. He has a master's degree in education and a PhD in education as well. Began a full-time ministry of creation science evangelism several years ago. He's been our guest before, and he is the one that suggested this debate between creationists and evolutionists. Dr. Scott.
Yes.
Dr. Hovind posed a question a little while ago about how evolutionists view evolution. Did fish become amphibians? They in turn became reptiles. Reptiles became mammals. Is that how evolutionists view this process?
Well, only in a very rough and general sense. You ought to think about evolution. Let me give you a little metaphor to maybe help you understand it a little bit better. You have parents, and you have grandparents, and you have great-great-grandparents, and great-great-greats, and on ad nauseum. Those are your lineal ancestors, right?
Mm-hmm.
Simultaneously, you also have not just your parents, but your uncles and aunts, and your great-uncles and great-aunts, and your great-great-uncles and great-great-aunts, etc. You've got all these collateral kin as well. And you've got their offspring. You've got your cousins and your second cousins and your third cousins, your umpty-ump cousins, and so forth. When you look at the fossil record, the probability of fossilization is not very good. What you're likely to find is a lot of these collateral kin, and not necessarily very many of those lineal kin, the parents and grandparents and great-great-grandparents of a species. Now, if we look at the fossil record, what we see is a very definite pattern. We see at the beginning very simple organisms, and then we find multicellular organisms. We find in the Cambrian, we find a whole explosion of invertebrate organisms with hard shells, so they show up better in the fossil record. And we can find ancestors for most of the living invertebrates in that Cambrian explosion. A little bit later on, we find that in the marine, in the ocean, you find animals that look like very primitive fish. They're not fish like you're going to go out and catch this weekend. They're not the bony fish. They're a very primitive kind of fish. They don't even have bony skeletons. They've got cartilage skeletons. If you want to call them fish, you can call them fish, but you shouldn't get them mixed up with your local perch and your local trout. It's only later on that you get those more advanced kinds of fishes.
But what I hear you saying so far, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we have instances of fossilized records of various and sundry different species, some of which do no longer exist. They are extinct.
Correct.
But do we have any missing links? For instance, where is the missing link that would go between a man and an ape? Where is the missing link that would go between the fish you were just talking about and the kind of fish that we have today?
There actually are intermediate forms between the primitive fish and the bony fish, or the osteichthyes. I'm sorry, I'm not a specialist in ichthyology, so I really can't just roll those right off my tongue.
Okay.
There are some nice transitions between these early fish-like creatures, these early marine forms, and the earliest land forms. Some people call them amphibians. They're probably better called tetrapods, which means four-footed, because they have some similarities to amphibians. But when you think of amphibian, you think of a modern-day amphibian like a frog or a salamander or something. They weren't like those at all. They were very primitive. When you come to humans and, I'm sorry, I got distracted here by your question. We do have nice intermediates between those early marine forms and the first land forms. We've got lovely intermediates between primitive land creatures that some people call reptiles, although they're not identical to modern reptiles, of course, and mammals. And eventually, when you get up to the primates, you've got quite a marvelous record of fossils of early humans. There's a lot of confusion out there. People think that the human fossil record is particularly skimpy. It isn't. We've got lots and lots of fossils.
But do we have fossils of humans that are more like apes than humans? In other words,
in fact, if you read the creationist literature, they have a great deal of difficulty with the human fossil record because in their way of thinking, there's only the created ape kind and only the created human kind. And so they have a lot of difficulty forcing every fossil into this Procrustean bed of either ape or human. And what's amusing to look at the creationist literature is you take a fossil like Homo erectus, the Peking man or Java man fossils, and some creationists say, oh, well, it's just an ape, and other creationists say, oh, well, it's all human. I mean, it's obvious that this is an intermediate form, and it's difficult to classify.
Okay, Dr.
But earlier than the Homo erectus fossils, and it gets even more difficult to classify these forms. They look more and more ape-like.
I want to ask you a question in a second about the age of the Earth and why you feel that you have scientific proof that it is as old as the evolutionists say it is. But Dr. Hovind has been taking notes furiously over here, so let him have a crack at some of the things that you've said so far.
Well, yeah, we've uncovered a can of worms here. She says the fossil record is not good. That's always a good one, shield to hide behind. You know, we don't have these missing links. Actually, the whole chain is missing.
Well, we got plenty of fossils. We've got lots of intermediate forms.
Okay, I disagree 100%. I think I could discredit each and every one, or it could be interpreted from a creationist viewpoint. There are probably many species that have gone extinct. If the creator designed the creation with a variety of different kinds, basic kinds of animals, and they produced varieties of offspring, for instance, dogs, you know, there's 250 kinds of dogs, and they all came from a common ancestor. It was the dogs that got off Noah's Ark.
How about beetles?
There's hundreds of kinds of beetles. I don't know how many different various kinds there are. There's lots of species and subspecies, and, you know, you break it down. See, our modern classification system, done by Carolus Linnaeus here in the last few hundred years, is not necessarily, you know, species is not necessarily the biblical kind.
That's a very difficult issue for you folks, because
well, it's difficult for you folks.
Creationist defines kind as species, as family, even as order, and one even defined it as a phylum. So if you've got a concept that is that wishy-washy, it's pretty difficult to say that it's a very good scientific way of classifying nature.
But do we have anything that's currently living that we can point to and say, yes, that used to be so-and-so, but it has evolved into something else? We do have things that we can point to and say, yes, they have adapted to their environment, but can we say that one kind of marsupial became another kind of marsupial?
Well, how about lions and tigers? How about if we look at speciation in action, so to speak?
Okay.
If you take lions and tigers, basically they occupy the same kind of ecological niche, one in Africa, one in Asia. It's a large felid. It's hunting large ungulate animals, generally by stalking rather than by running them down. And it basically kills animals because of its very, very great strength. Tigers and lions can interbreed in a zoo. There have been a few cases where, accidentally, tigers and lions have gotten together in the biblical sense and have produced ligers or tigons, whatever you want to call them, but it's a hybrid between a tiger and a lion. It doesn't normally occur in nature, of course. But what that shows is that these two species, which are really quite different morphologically, actually are genetically similar enough to exchange genes and still be considered close to being the same species. Now, I suppose a creationist would explain that, well, God actually created the lion kind or maybe the tiger kind, and they've diverged since the flood. I think the evolutionist argument is much more satisfactory. The evolutionist would say that you've got, back in the Miocene period, you've got large cats that expanded over the Africa and Asia and even Eurasian continent. They were separated off during the Pliocene, when the climate got considerably drier and the Arabian desert area sort of cut off this faunal transfer from one continent to another. And you end up with lions in Africa and tigers in Asia, which are in the process of diversifying into two separate species.
Let me ask you a question, Doctor.
Oh, but they're still the same kind of animal. They're still a cat. I mean, change the butterfly to a lion. Now that would be evolution. And
no,
see,
it wouldn't be. It'd be nonsense. No evolutionist on this planet ever said that lions are descended from butterflies.
Okay, they believe.
If you go back far enough, you can probably find a common answer to butterflies and lions.
See, that's a religion.
Butterflies and lions, but it's absurd to say that lions and butterflies are directly, one evolved into the other.
Okay, let me ask Dr. Hovind a question. I have to take a break in a second here, but how do you explain if life began, as the Bible says it does in Genesis in the Garden of Eden, that animals were created on one day and then man was created on another day and woman, following that, how do we explain that all the kangaroos in the world are in Australia? That all the tigers and lions, except those who've been moved artificially here, and elephants are in Africa, that horses were not native to America, that they were brought here from Europe? Why wouldn't particularly the Middle East,
How do you
have elephants and
That's what you're asking.
pardon me?
The question you're asking, Mike, is how do you explain biogeography? How do you
Correct,
explain the distribution of plants and animals?
Well, I would have no problem. I would say there was a worldwide flood 4,400 years ago. There were 2 of each or 7 of some of basic kinds of animals on the board Noah's Ark. And in the last 4,400 years, there's been an enormous variation within the created kind. I don't know if lions and tigers have a common ancestor.
But wait a minute. If the flood took place and the Ark came down on Mount Ararat...
In that region, right?
In that region, how do you explain kangaroos exclusively migrating to Australia across a large landmass and across a large body of water after that, and having oak trees in England and America, but not in the Middle East?
Well, the different climates are, there's biological warfare going on. That's not a good term to use, but the species do compete for land space, and some maybe would not be competent to survive.
But how do they get there?
How did they get there?
Well, if the oceans were not as deep as they are today, if you lowered the oceans just 1,000 feet, and they average 15,000 feet in depth, if you took that much water out of the oceans, all the continents become connected. The continental land bridge would be enormous between all these continents. The Bible says in the book of Genesis, chapter 10, in the days of Peleg, about 100 years after the flood, the earth was divided. There are several different creationist viewpoints on that, and it's not provable. Nobody was there. But the interpretation that I give to that is that the ice caps that had come all the way down to Kansas City, Missouri during the time of the flood were melting back. And that's why we have a continental shelf. And that's why within the first 100 years, the animals were able to get to different continents and then became isolated there and trapped where they are. There are marsupials over here, and kangaroo fossils have been found in other places. They've been found in Africa. But
they haven't.
Yes, they have.
Kangaroo fossils in Africa? That's nonsense. Your question is an excellent one, Mike. You've got the 2 little kangaroos hopping from the Middle East over across South Asia, and actually some creationists bring in continental drift here. They have the marsupials of Australia, this very unique fauna, hopping over into the continent of Australia, which then amazingly breaks apart from Asia at that point and sails down about 45 miles per hour to its present location in the South Pacific. But isn't it funny that the only place where you find fossil kangaroos and fossil Australian marsupials is in Australia? How come if those little varmints had to go all the way from the Middle East to South Asia and across into Australia, that they didn't leave any fossils behind them? They must not have reproduced. And
well, no, just a minute.
2 little kangaroo kind managed to stay close to each other? Did they hold hands all the way across the ocean? I mean, the biogeography is a real problem for flood geology.
All right, I got to take a break, and when I come back, I want to ask you, Dr. Scott, how you can prove through scientific means the age of the Earth, because that's one of the questions that came up last time Dr. Hovind was here. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you refuted carbon dating.
Yes, sir.
Okay. We'll talk about that when we come right back on WBT.
This is the VA and FHA refinancing program that you've heard so much about. No credit report, no job or income verification, and no points on loans over $70,000.
You don't need the headphones. When we're off the air, you can talk.
Mortgage Group of America, can I help you?
Mortgage Group of America is meeting the growing demand for innovative mortgage refinancing. And right now, interest rates remain at a 20-year low. But how long it will last, no one knows. By calling right now, you'll start saving money every month on your VA or FHA mortgage payment. There's no credit report, no job or income verification, and no points on loans over $70,000.
Just joins us from California. She is a pro-evolution evolutionist, I guess is the best way to say that. I want to get into the topic of, because both of you want to get into this, the topic of creationism and evolution versus religion, or evolution as a religion. But first, both today and last time Dr. Hovind was here, he disputed the scientific evidence, quote unquote, of the age of the Earth as put forward by scientists who have used carbon dating. How do we know, Dr. Scott, that the Earth is older than Dr. Hovind says it is, 6,000 years old?
Well, we know immediately from looking at tree ring dates. You understand about how every year a tree puts on an annular ring.
Right.
And you can match up trees from an area and literally count back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years from when that tree was cut down to when it was started, and so forth and so on. And tree ring dates already go back to in excess of 12,000 years. So right there, in a very, very simple, non-chemical, not difficult at all, procedure, the world is obviously more than 6,000 years old. You can do the same thing with cores from the ocean, sea cores, and cores from glaciers. Glaciers also put on sort of an annular ring in a sense. They put on identifiable layers with every year. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that don't really take don't take a big laboratory to understand to immediately show that the world is more than 6,000 years. But of course, evolutionists claim that the world is billions of years old. And you don't have to depend upon radiocarbon dates. That's only one kind of radioactive isotope.
Dr. Hovind was over here shaking his head during the tree ring explanation. So.
Sure, yes. Overlapping...
Still there, Doctor?
Yes, I'm there.
Okay, just checking.
Yeah, the overlapping tree rings is an interesting one. There's been a lot of different studies on that. Dendrochronology is interesting. The idea is that you can match up the burn marks if a tree had a fire for forest.
No. You don't match up the burn marks. You match up the actual width of the rings.
Okay.
And you have to use the same species.
Sure, and I'm sure you're familiar with the fact that some trees produce more than one ring a year and some produce no rings a year. It's not an exact science like you try to make it out to be.
Well, it is, because if you use bristlecone pine, they only put one ring per year, and bristlecone pine are like redwoods. They live for very, very long periods of time.
Oh, I agree. And the oldest living bristlecone pine is 4,300 years old, which would put it after the flood. The Bible teaches the flood was 4,400 years ago.
The flood took place.
Well, hold it. Now, why is the oldest living tree 4,300 years old? Oldest living bristlecone pine.
I think that's pretty impressive that there's anything that old. I mean, you're expecting to have one that's 6,000 years old? Come on.
Well, why not? I mean, you're the one that believes it's that old. I mean, I'm saying there isn't any physical proof that anything was here before. And I think before the flood, some trees were obviously growing around the world. And the evolutionist idea that they try to get across the point that the creationists believe that all life started in the Garden of Eden. That's not at all what the Bible teaches. Animals and plants were created all over the world. It was only man that started in the Garden of Eden. The world was full of critters. She mentioned the ice cores. That's interesting. They just dug up some World War II airplanes that had crash landed there in Greenland in 1944, I believe. They were 250 feet deep in the ice with thousands of layers, laminate layers. It would look like they'd been down there for 50,000 years because of all these different layers. All you got to have is one volcano 1,000 miles away or 10,000 miles away, and you get an ash cloud drift over. It deposits many layers. Ice cores is a very inexact science. You cannot prove the world is billions of years old from that. Those planes are 250 feet deep in less than 50 years.
I don't know anything about those planes, but I do know that when it comes to tree rings, you don't have to have one tree that's 14,000 years old in order to trace back the annular rings. You compare different trees. If you find an archaeological site, say in the Southwest, that where the Indians had used bristlecone pine for beams or for some other purpose, you can take a core from that and you can match it up to that tree that is 4,000 years old and see where those rings match up. And they will. They'll be wide or narrow, depending, and it's...
Well, hold on. I'm sure you're familiar, if you've had biology and stuff, that trees, the width of their ring is determined by a number of things. And the California fires here this last week showed us that sometimes the fire rips up one valley and leaves another valley alone. Maybe the burn marks or maybe even the width of the rings. If a tree was growing with other trees around it, as it matures, the other trees fall down, it gets more sunlight. Now, it gets a wider ring, where another tree 50 feet away does not get a wider ring. The rings do not always match up exactly, and it is not an exact science like they try to make it out to believe.
Okay, I got a break one more time. When we come back, to me, as the interloper here or the intermediary here, it seems to make a little difference whether you're right, Dr. Hovind, or whether Dr. Scott is right. Because to me, evolution is not mutually exclusive to a belief in a creator.
Right.
And nor is your point of view, Dr. Hovind. So I want to find out why you both feel the way you feel, and why you feel, Dr. Hovind, that the evolutionists are really a religious group.
Yeah, that's all it is. It's a religion.
To me, I don't understand that, so we'll
sure.
get the answer to that. And when we come back in just a second. With what you need to get cooking this holiday season indoors and out, Butterfields, etc. in South Park, and the brand brought up the topic of religion here, and there is some question about whether evolution should be taught in the schools, and about whether creationism should, why it's not allowed to be taught in the schools. And you, Dr. Hovind, feel that the evolutionists approach this like a religion. Why? To me, religion automatically says there must be a God at the top of the pedestal, and creationists deny that evolutionists believe that God is responsible for it.
Well, no, the evolutionists definitely have a couple of gods. They have the god of chance. They have the god of time. They believe the world's billions of years old. It's a religious belief in the sense that it's not observable or testable. They cannot show how the matter got here. The world is made of matter. Space is full of matter. Where did it come from? How did it get here? It had to be created. So it is a religion. Now, they believe no deity was responsible. The universe just kind of made itself a cosmic quirk of some kind. And then they have to somehow get life from non-life. Well, that's a religious belief. That's not observable or testable or demonstratable. That's something they believe happened in the distant past. And it's just a religion.
Is that the way you, Dr. Scott?
You know, it's funny, hearing a creationist define what evolution is sort of like having Madeleine Murray O'Hair to Catholicism. You might learn something, but it's elude. First of all, mention being first or the beginning of evolution. At the beginning of what evolution is, what creationism is, and we distinguish. Start with the Big Bang. Fine. I don't care how the Big Bang got here. Maybe it was supernatural, maybe it was natural. However the Big Bang got here, matter was produced. And at that point, we had the evolution of stars, we had the evolution of galaxies, we had the evolution of planets like our own. Start someplace else. Start with the first replicating molecule. Maybe it occurred naturally, maybe it occurred supernaturally. We don't know right now. Science has to investigate it from a natural standpoint, because that's the limitation of science. Science, as I mentioned before, is a limited endeavor. We have to explain the natural world using natural processes. There's nothing any more atheistic about science than there is atheistic about long division. You can do long division without invoking the supernatural. You've got to do science without invoking the supernatural.
I agree.
Let's take that first replicating molecule.
Sure.
Okay, however it got here, what happened? Did all the plants and animals occur suddenly at one time? That's Kent's position. My position, and that of the vast majority of scientists, is that after you get that first replicating molecule, you have the gradual development of plants and animals through time, not the sudden appearance of everything. So that's the difference between creation and evolution, and that's the confusion that they make between first cause and evolution.
Okay.
Evolution does not depend on a natural origin of that first replicating molecule.
Okay, you mentioned a couple things there. You said that I think, if I understand you right, you kind of admitted that at least the Big Bang part and the first replicating molecule part are not testable and are not part of science, and yet they are very much part of the school textbooks.
No, I didn't say they weren't testable. As a matter of fact, there right now is very active science going on in discussing which of a number of alternate explanations best explains the origin of the first replicating molecule.
Sure. Is creation one of those you're considering?
Not from a scientific standpoint, you can't, because you can't consider supernatural explanation in science. It's one of the limitations.
Okay, so the entire subject of origins is outside the realm of science. And until they get it solved positively, I would like it out of the textbooks. I don't think kids should be taught your view without being taught all views.
I don't think that it is outside of science. I think a supernatural explanation is outside of science.
Well, hold it. You begged the question. How did the universe get started? How did the first life get started? Do you know? Can you prove it scientifically? You're outside the realm of science. Believe me.
There are a number of theories that are competing with each other right now about the first replicating molecule.
Sure, and the kids ought to be shown all of them, including the creation theory.
Actually, it might come as a surprise to you, but when I was teaching evolution at the college level, I would mention to kids that I would say, well, here we're going to study evolution. Evolution means change, describe it a little bit. And there's lots and lots of evidence to show that this change through time took place. And now we're going to discuss, or during the semester, we're going to discuss how this change could have come about. And it could have come about through natural selection, through Lamarckism, through saltation, et cetera, and possibly it might have come about because it was the will of the supernatural, because it was God's will.
Yeah, but
you
still missed the origins part.
This is the important part. I'd go on to say, we can't study that in this class because this is a science class, and science is incompetent to study the supernatural. I guess if we somehow invent a theometer, we can do it, but until that point, we can't bring supernatural explanations in to explain the natural world.
And with that, I got to stop because we have to break for news. Dr. Kent Hovind's here in the studio, Dr. Genie Scott in California. They both agreed to stay over into the next half hour, and we'll continue our conversation following the news next here on 1110 WBT. Charlotte.
Go ahead, Chester.
Questions, although we request to keep your questions very short. 570-1110 or toll-free 800-WBT-1110. We left off in the last half hour where we had the argument between evolution as a religion and the fact that evolution is taught in schools while creationism is not, because it is considered to be religion. Dr. Scott, do you see a problem with teaching one but not the other?
Not at all, because I do not agree in the slightest that evolution is a religion. Evolution is part of science. Science has to be religiously neutral. It's a limited enterprise that must explain the natural world using non-supernatural means.
But are you discouraging the teaching of creationism to children?
I am discouraging the teaching of creationism as science to children. I think that children should learn biblical literalist creationism. They should learn non-literalist creationism. They should learn the creation stories of the Munduruku and the Hopi and the Australian Aborigines. I think comparative religion is a wonderful idea, and I think children need to know that.
Dr. Hovind, since Dr. Scott believes that children should be taught all of those things, do you believe children should be taught all of those things?
Oh, I collect the public school textbooks. I assure you they are not taught biblical creationism in the public school textbooks, at least at the grade school, junior high, and high school level. It is not offered. I have the books from every major publisher.
But you believe they should be taught?
Sure, that's only fair.
You believe they should be taught the other creationist theories of other religions?
Oh yeah, I think on a level playing field, if kids were allowed to view all the various options, if somebody says, hey, we think the world's not standing on the back of a giant turtle, they would see that silly. And I think the literal biblical creationist view would win out hands down.
So actually, between the two of you on this topic, we have no argument. It's just that Dr. Scott doesn't want to see the creationist point of view taught as science. Is that correct?
Right, but see, she wants her evolution, which is a religion, included in with science. That's where I would differ. Evolution should also be in the comparative religions.
I don't understand why you think it's a religion. I don't understand that.
In order to be science, it has to be observable. Nobody observed them when the world was created. Nobody has ever seen an animal change to any other kind of animal. That's never been observed. Cats always have kittens.
Let's go quickly to the phones before we run out of time in this segment. WBT, you're on the air with our two guests. Hi.
Yeah, I think the truest thing that's been said here is that this is a situation that cannot be resolved. Obviously, both people have their own set of facts, and they're going to interpret it. But I have a question. Assuming this lady, Miss Scott, is saying that the only place that we have a story of creationism is in the Bible, and assuming that story of creationism is wrong, the problem that I see is the whole Bible crumbles. In order to take her theory, have her explain how it could be that you could have millions of years of death through evolution, and the Bible specifically says no one died until man sinned. Now, the danger is when you take her view, as Christians have tried to do in the last few years, you destroy God's creation. And if you read the book of Job, you will find that God didn't even address Job and give him an explanation of how he was. He said, Job, can you even explain my creation?
In Exodus chapter 19, verse 4, it says that God sent eagles to fly Israel on their wings out of Egypt. Did that really happen?
Well, there's metaphors and similes used all through the Bible. The weatherman says the sun rose this morning.
Who's to pick and choose what are metaphors and what are literal?
Well, in the Hebrew rendering, it's obvious. I mean, any child can pick it out, you know. But the weatherman this morning said the sun rose at 6:15. Did the sun rise or did the earth turn?
Someone answer my question. How could we have evolution? See, I much resent someone saying it doesn't matter whether the earth evolved or was created, and I think God finds that to be an abomination.
All right, stop. Whoa! Well, I told you to keep it short. Now,
I agree. It matters a lot.
You're gone. You can listen to the answer on the radio.
It matters a lot. I agree.
Dr. Scott, do you have a problem with that?
I'm not really sure what his question was, to tell you the truth.
His question was, how can we believe in evolution with thousands and thousands and millions of years of death if the Bible says that no one died until man sinned? And man didn't sin until Adam and Eve ate the apple off the tree, which I don't know how many days that was in the Garden of Eden, but it wasn't very long.
Well, it's a non-question because he's saying, first, assume the Bible is literally true, which, of course, the majority of Christian denominations do not assume. And then, if you assume the Bible is literally true, how can you say you're right? And, of course, in science, you're not assuming the Bible is literally true. I mean, maybe a way of turning this question around would be to ask him. I mentioned before that there were 80 separate layers of coal seams in the Midwest. If you take a look at the amount of coal reserves that there are in the world, the entire biomass of the world today couldn't possibly be converted to that much fossil fuel. There had to have been an enormous amount of time involved in the laying down of those coal seams.
Or a different set of conditions.
That much organic material at one time. Obviously there was death. I think your caller might need to talk to a minister more than to a scientist.
Okay, we got to take a break. We'll come right back with more of your phone calls. Dr. Kent Hovind, Dr. Eugenie Scott here on WBT.
Own Carolina Panthers helmet #1 and help United Way of Central Carolinas.
Solutionist, and you're next on WBT. Keep it short. Hi.
I have a question related for the creationist. Given the fact, or given the fact that the Bible says that the stars, the sun, and the moon were created during the 7 days of creation, and the fact that that stars are measurably millions of light years away, and the light that we see now was in fact being produced millions of years ago, I don't see how that can be reconciled with the 10,000 year
good question.
In the creation.
All right, good question.
Sure, good question. You're laboring under a delusion here. You say the stars are measurably millions of light years away. That simply is not true. The furthest they can measure using parallax trigonometry is about 60 to 100 light years. So we do not know how far away those stars are. It could be the whole universe is rotating like everything else is, and the red shift is caused by the stars moving instead of by their great distances. Nobody knows what causes the red shift, and we do not know how far away the stars are beyond 100 light years. Some say 200. Okay, I'll give them 200. Secondly, I'm not saying they're all within 100 light year radius. Now, don't misunderstand that. I'm just saying they cannot be measured, period. Secondly, we do not know that the speed of light has always been what it is today. There is no possible way to prove the speed of light is a constant, and it has always been at this speed. And thirdly, you cannot prove that God did not create a mature creation. Adam and Eve were full grown. They looked like adults when they were 0 years old.
How do you know? Were you there?
No, I wasn't there, but see, that's a reasonable explanation of it. The evolutionist explanation is the only one that is tax supported. I'm not against people believing in evolution. I'm against supporting it with my tax dollars.
Dr. Scott, any comments?
Well, he gets into real problems with theologians if he suggests that God is a trickster that made everything just look old because he wanted to fool us into thinking evolution had taken place. So that was an explanation that was rejected 200 years ago. 300 years ago when it was first suggested by Hermann Gosse. The idea that God just made everything look old is one that theologians have a lot of trouble with for obvious reasons.
No, I didn't say he made it look old. It has to be mature. The trees had to be full grown or they don't work. Adam and Eve, he didn't create babies. It's just a matter of function. It has to be mature.
So in terms of the distance of the stars, he just made it look like the stars were billions of light years away.
Hold it. Do you know that light has always traveled at the same speed? Do you know what light is? Can you show me anybody who knows what light is? Is it particles, waves, photons? There isn't a person in the...
kept up with the creationist literature. There's been quite a bit of discussion about Barry Setterfield's idea that an Australian creationist that somehow the speed of light has slowed down in the last couple of thousands of years. Most creationists have rejected that firmly.
Well, I don't know. I wasn't there either. But I'm just saying it is a reasonable explanation. And the evolutionist explanation is the only tax-supported religion we have right now, and I resent that.
All right, let's go off to another phone call. WBT, hello.
Mike, I appreciate you having this discussion on the air today.
Okay, make it quick.
Got a quick quote and then a question for your guest in California. As to whether or not evolution is fact or faith, L. Harrison Matthews, in his introduction to Origin of Species, Darwin's Origin of Species, said, "The fact of evolution is the backbone of biology, and biology is thus in peculiar position of being a science founded upon an unproved theory. Is it then a science or a faith? Belief in the theory of evolution is thus exactly parallel to belief in special creation."
What's your question? Don't read a book to me. What's your question?
Well, I was just he said.
What's your question?
My question is, how does she reconcile the fact that there are dinosaur footprints that have been found alongside of human footprints in Texas, if, assumingly, she believes that the dinosaurs were extinct before man came into being?
Doctor?
If your readers want to know about the Paluxy River footprints, they can call me on our 800 number, if you don't mind me giving it, Mike. We have carefully analyzed the Paluxy River so-called man tracks and dinosaur tracks together. There's nothing to it. They are erosional features. They're scour marks. In some cases, they're eroded dinosaur prints. I'm sorry to say there is no evidence of dinosaur and human footprints together in Texas or any place else.
Okay, I was there 2 weeks ago, Mike, in Glen Rose, Texas. This is a casting. I'm holding it in my hand. You're welcome to examine it. This is a casting from there, certified by Clifford Burdick, a geologist who found it in the strata. There are 600 of those footprints. I have walked in them myself. I have analyzed them carefully also, and I would disagree 100%.
Dr. Scott, this footprint is as long as my forearm.
16 inches long, size 24.
And it's probably just as deep as the dinosaur footprints were, too.
But they tried to say that's a dinosaur footprint.
I have no idea. You know, the wonders of radio, I can't exactly see what you're holding up.
Well, what I'm holding is a casting of a footprint that is the length of my forearm.
Size 24.
And it is a footprint. I mean, it is a large, unless it was artificially made, it is a large footprint.
Well, a lot of them were artificially made.
Okay,
That
hold
was
it
quite
just a minute now.
Industry back in the Depression. People would cut out dinosaur footprints and sell them to tourists, and they human footprints they sold even better.
Okay.
And Burdick will admit that an awful lot of those prints are human are carvings, are fakes.
An awful lot. Wait a minute. 5 or 6 were carved, and you're right about that. But 600 have been excavated.
Right, let me try to get one more phone call before we go any further here, because we're running out of time fast. Hi, WBT. You there? Guess not. Hi, WBT. You there?
Yes, Mike, I am.
Okay.
I have a question for Dr. Scott, and I'm not a scientist by any means, but in regards to the law of thermodynamics, how can you explain the first law where it states that matter and energy works from a organized state to a disorganized state in light of evolution, which seems the opposite, from a disorganized state to a very organized and complex state? And I'll hang up and listen to the answer.
Okay, thanks for your call. Doctor?
Here again, sir, I'm afraid you've been misled by somebody. They've only given you part of the story about the second law of thermodynamics. They've left out a very important component, which is that, yes, there's a tendency for matter to become, or energy to become less organized in a closed system. The planet Earth is an open system because it receives energy from the sun. And there is no problem at all from a physics standpoint with evolution taking place, because on the planet Earth and perhaps elsewhere in the universe, who knows, we are dealing with open thermodynamic systems.
Dr. Scott is the executive director of the National Center for Science Education. You wanted to give out your toll-free number. Go ahead and do that.
If any of your listeners are interested in the creation-evolution controversy, they can call me at 1-800-290-6006.
800-290-6006. We're out of time. Dr. Kent Hovind is in town tonight and tomorrow night to speak at the Denver Baptist Church from 7 until, 9 o'clock?
Yes, till 9.
And it's a multi-video. It's a slide.
Yeah, I got lots of visuals, hands-on stuff, and I cannot afford an 800 number, but if I could give mine,
sure,
they could contact me.
Absolutely.
I'm at Pensacola, Florida, and it's Hovind, and it's 904-479-DINO, D-I-N-O.
Is that the 8987 number?
Yes.
Okay.
No, I got this my home phone. DINO is the office line.
Okay, DINO is the office line. Okay, D-I-N-O. It's spelled H-O-V-I-N-D. Kent Hovind. Hovind, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you, sir.
And I hope we can call on you again, Dr. Scott, sometime in the future.
I'd be happy to.
Thank you. Thanks for staying over, too. It's 4:26.